I'm here today in Chiang Mai and I wanted to share some thoughts on things that expat YouTubers do that kind of bug me. And the first of these things is to condescend to people who are interested in becoming expats. I think that there's this kind of purity spiral, if you could call it that, that some people in expat communities seem to go through where they feel like no matter what you do, it's insufficient to live overseas, to try life in another country. If you're not living on $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month, you might as well not even try. You might as well go back to your home country. If you can't afford to rent or purchase a place in the nicest city, in the most expensive neighborhood, you're not really living. I think another factor that comes into play here, people will say, oh, well, you don't want to be a bachelor. As an expat, you have to date, or you have to get married, or you have to have kids. And certainly that's great for some people, right? Some people, they see moving overseas as an opportunity to have a family that perhaps in their home country, for whatever reason, it just wasn't as easy. I don't think it's helpful to dictate to other people what's going to work best for them. I think that life is really up to the individual in a lot of ways. What makes sense for one person doesn't necessarily make sense for everybody. I suspect that they feel like because they're really good at one thing or they're good at living overseas, that they're good at giving advice. Maybe there's certain aspects that they've gotten correctly in their life, but people who are good at telling you pointers or tips or aspects of expat life that you want to be careful about or you want to look out for don't necessarily know other aspects of life. And as an example, each individual has a different financial situation, each individual has a different health situation, and each individual has a different happiness situation. What one person might want living in the biggest city in the country and spending a lot of time in urban districts might make somebody else really unhappy. There are some objective criteria, like if you're somebody that needs healthcare, yeah, you probably need to be in a decent sized city. That's a valid concern. But to say that you're not really living unless you are eating in the nicest steakhouse, and you're not really living unless you support family of 4 or 5 or 6 people, it's just ridiculous. It's not really realistic, and people really need to not judge other people and not condescend to other people about their lifestyle choices. Additionally, I'd say a lot of expats are more financially prepared than you would think. I think that we do tend to see some extreme examples like broke expat John, but I don't think that that's the norm. Is it more common than we'd like? Yeah, probably, but I think a lot of people are older guys who have a pension or have investments, or young guys that have some kind of online income. They're not trying to go to Southeast Asia and live on the beach in a tent and live off of food they catch from the ocean. That's not really realistic. I think that most people, not all, but most people are aware of the visa requirements. They are aware that they have to stay within the law to live overseas. This is just something I've noticed among a number of expat YouTubers, even expat YouTubers that I like some of their content, where they go on there and they say, oh, the locals are really getting tired of this and that. You're giving us a bad name. You're making us look bad. It's just condescending. Like, who are you talking to? The people that subscribe to your channel ideally have values in line with yours, right? I would hope that most people aren't just hate watching expat YouTubers. And so yeah, there's this attitude of, oh, you need to do this. No, stop. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's that these guys or gals are used to being in a position of authority back home. Now that they're in this foreign country, the same power structures aren't present and they don't know what to do with themselves. They feel like, well, I need to assert dominance over people, so I'm going to make videos talking about how, oh, people are really tired of this or people are really tired of that. Anybody that moves to a different country has a responsibility to understand the general laws, legal requirements, restrictions. They understand that if they mess up or do the wrong thing, there is law enforcement. It's not your job to police the world. And I think that that's kind of another point that ties into this condescension factor, is that some expat YouTubers feel like they have this savior complex. Their videos are going to somehow change certain dynamics that are present in people wanting to try out different developing countries. The harsh reality is, part of the equation is that our money goes farther. Trying to act like there's there's this huge barrier to entry. It's really, in my opinion, there's not as big of a barrier to entry to living overseas as there has been in the past, because you have things like the internet. You can watch videos. You might plan. I mean, I've seen some people in some of these videos commenting, I'm planning to become an expat in 5 years or 7 years. So it's not something where they just like, you know what? I think I'm going to go live in another country. I'm going to go buy a plane ticket for $1,000 to a place I've never been, never seen pictures of. I don't know what kind of food they eat. I mean, it's just, this condescension has to stop. It's not helpful. One, it's not helpful for people watching these videos, earnestly trying to educate themselves or improve their experience. And then for those people that are problem people that would benefit from watching these videos, people that have problematic behavior, just telling them to change is not necessarily going to be that helpful. It's not a matter of just like, oh, wow, you know what? I was going to go be a real jerk, but I watched this video and now all of a sudden I'm not going to be a jerk anymore. It just doesn't seem likely. Additionally, when I hear it makes us look bad, I want to ask, who is us? Is it Western Europeans? Is it people from the United States? Is it people from Canada? There's this idea that all expats are the same. That's not really the case. I mean, here in Chiang Mai, where I am right now, there's a number of expats from Japan that probably have very little in common with a Western or European expat. They're people that may not speak any English at all and can't really relate to some of the interests or desires. Perhaps they lived in a major city in East Asia where they didn't need to own a car, whereas a Western expat might expect, hey, I'm going to need to have some kind of car. These are just really small differences. I think that there's a problem there with saying expats are this or expats are that. There's millions of people from all over the world living in countries that are different from their origin. I know personally, living in the United States and being in touch or being close with various immigrant communities. Now, I know that's controversial, the difference between what is an expat versus what is an immigrant. Something else to point out is like, hey, this is not as uncommon as it was perhaps at some points in the past. It's not that radical. As it relates to income, I think that flying has come down, that in the past it was extremely exclusive. Now I know a lot of people that even if they haven't gotten to fly for a vacation, that they've flown, in some cases they've flown to another country for work. My last employer, we had numerous people come from the UK to the US for work purposes on a fairly regular basis. It wasn't that unheard of. I think there's some gatekeeping there that goes with the condescension that I'd like to see stop. Hope that at some point in the future it becomes more normalized to the extent that people don't feel like, oh, I'm the person that needs to go and correct all these people from my home country. The truth is that everybody's an individual. I just thought it was important to point out the issue I have with expat YouTubers condescending, trying to talk down to their audience. Like, there's also an element to me, hey, I want to be exclusive over here. You need to stay home. You need to live back home and not come over here because I live over here and I want to enjoy my castle with nobody else around. And that's also unrealistic. There's a lot of people that want to check out other countries, especially like in the West. I think a lot of Western people are becoming concerned with the cost of living and numerous other issues that I'm not going to get into in this video. I just find it most ironic coming from the US, where the US is a melting pot, a nation of immigrants. The vast majority of people in the United States have come to the United States as far as their family background in the last couple hundred years, aside from Native Americans or indigenous people. Everybody is an immigrant or descended from a recent one, and it just doesn't make any sense to gatekeep there, to condescend. The next point I'm going to mention is number two thing that expat YouTubers do that gets on my nerves is giving bad advice, telling guys, hey, you don't need to do this, or hey, you don't need to do that. It goes in line a bit with the condescension thing. They feel like they need to give advice, and not only do they need to give advice, but they give bad advice. Personally, I don't think most advice is very helpful. I think that you really need to do a lot of researching, digging, and find out what makes the most sense for your individual circumstance. There's so many areas of life where what works for you may not work for somebody else. And that's why I just find the insistence on giving advice to just not always be helpful. Like, they'll tell you, oh, you don't need to talk to anybody online. Well, if you're in your home country and you want to know what it's like to live in another country, one of the things that can be helpful for that is talking to somebody that lives in that other country. Email communication, they assume that all guys in the West or all single guys in the West only want to date as quickly as possible, get married as quickly as possible. But part of what helps a guy or a gal or whoever, a person, to make a determination, hey, does it make sense for me to do this, is getting to know people locally, right? One of the things that's helped me a lot living in Thailand is having local Thai friends that I can talk to, and these are platonic. There's no romantic situation going on. I have both female and male Thai friends, and it's been super helpful for me to learn about Thai culture, to talk with them. Of course, they do have a lot of English. But this idea that the single guys that reach out to women in Southeast Asia online to chat are all victims and all the women are scammers is ridiculous. You can have basic conversation with somebody and it not be transactional. Now, I understand a lot of guys feel compelled, hey, this woman that I'm talking to, she's in a rough situation, I want to help her out. They need to make that determination for themselves, what they can afford. I personally am familiar with a service called Cambly. This isn't a plug for Cambly, but people will pay to have conversation on Cambly. They'll pay, it's like 17 cents a minute or something like that. It's not a romantic thing. It's not a dating service. You get to practice talking to somebody from somewhere that they're a native English speaker. And I think that in reverse, talking to somebody that even if they have English as a second language, if they're speaking the local language, then perhaps you'll learn things about their culture. You can ask them about what it's like to live in that city, about the weather, and you really build up a knowledge. I think one of the things that is missing is reading a lot. More than watching YouTube videos, or alongside watching YouTube videos, I should say, you should be reading a lot. Read about the country's culture, read news articles, read different kinds of, maybe join groups or forums. Be careful. You want to have some discernment because some groups and forums are toxic. They have a lot of frustrated or spiteful people that you really don't want to be around. But I think one of the mistakes that people make is thinking, okay, well, I'll go watch a couple YouTube videos and buy my flight, when they might be better off planning well in advance. And planning far in advance should help to negate that seeking out bad advice that I think is some of what causes bad advice to be given, right? People in the comments saying, oh, well, which city or which island or which province has the best partners? That's ridiculous. It's not really helpful to pursue that question. There's so many individual variances that certain questions really shouldn't be taken, I won't say shouldn't be taken seriously, but people should push back and say, look, there's so much variation in that. It's kind of like when people ask me, what does it cost to live in Thailand? Well, a better question is, what will it cost you to live in Thailand? What do you like to do? If you like to have Western food every day, that's going to cost more. If you like to jet set around Thailand, that's going to cost you more. If you live in a smaller city like a Chiang Mai or a Chiang Rai, that's going to be cheaper than living in like a Bangkok or a Phuket. So that was number 2, giving bad advice. The number 3 thing that bugs me about expat YouTubers, or that I feel like expat YouTubers shouldn't do, is give partial truths. They're always unclear about various aspects of their life. They downplay, and I think this is part of this is social media, but they downplay bad things, or they over-exaggerate bad things. They downplay good things or over-exaggerate good things. They don't really give a balanced perspective. They'll tell you about how living overseas is the best thing ever and everybody should do it. Others will tell you, oh, no, only I should do it. Nobody else should do it. This is only for me. This is a way for you to look at how awesome my life is, but not really gain valuable insight other than the sort of pessimistic or the negative side of things. And I could see how some of that does come from experience. I'm not the most outgoing person, but if I was, then I would probably have a lot more stories of running into nasty expats or bad expats, people that perhaps didn't prepare financially to live overseas, that fall in their hard luck. But giving partial truths, only talking about the downside or only talking about the upside, exaggerating. Part of what I'm getting at here is that it's not a vacation 24/7 versus just visiting. I think that sometimes expat YouTubers give that impression where they spend all of their time at the beach or at the bar or doing whatever. There's a lot of normal stuff that you have to do living overseas that isn't so fun. There's visas that you need to get. There's appointments that you need to make. You've got to go grocery shopping. You have to deal with inclement weather sometimes sometimes there's heavy rain in the rainy season. It's not just this vacation year round. There's a lot of things that expat YouTubers don't necessarily talk about. I noticed that one of my most popular videos is how to get a visa, and people are like, oh, this should be hush hush. Like, why? Everybody should have access to this information because a lot of people could potentially benefit from it, and I don't really see the point. I'm not breaking any rules, and I just want to help people out with this content. Like, one thing that I see is, oh man, my relationship here is amazing, or oh, it's so amazing over here. Then if their relationship goes south, oh, it was a terrible relationship, oh, it was so toxic. And there's just this pendulum swing, and I know some of it too is to get views, or at least it has to be, because definitely controversy can be popular or can sell, but I just don't feel it to be entirely accurate to play up how awesome a relationship is, and then a couple months later, oh, it's terrible, it was so toxic, I'm having to go through all this stuff, this and that. It's yeah, you have to be really wanting to dig in, put boots on the ground, explore, and not necessarily look for a expat guru to give you the end-all be-all solution. Along with that, some expat YouTubers don't really talk about the language barrier and the challenges that can come along with that. They may speak the local language fluently for whatever reason, or it may be a country where English is prevalent. And sometimes these language barriers can really create obstacle to you fully enjoying a place. I think some places people might really like the local culture, they might love the local food, but the local language could be really difficult, and they feel like, there's always going to be this barrier here, where if you talk to an expat YouTuber, oh, it's not a big deal, everybody over there speaks English, or oh, you can just use a translate app. It can definitely cause some feelings of loneliness if you can't talk to people and you go months on end where you're very rarely having a in-depth, complex discussion, right? That's something that I'm always grateful for, that I have friends back home that I can chat with and catch up with and have engaging or interesting conversations. Because sometimes my friends here in Thailand, they're busy. They don't always have time to meet up or to hang out, just as I don't always have time to meet up or hang out. And it's really, really lovely to have that. What I'm getting at here is, when it comes to giving partial truths, there's going to be certain challenges that you run into or you encounter that you didn't anticipate, or that perhaps somebody that you watch or you subscribe to downplays that issue, or acts like, oh, well, because it's not an issue to me, it's not an issue to anyone. Each person's circumstances are different. So that was number 3, giving partial truths. Number 4 is going to be playing status games. And this relates to each of my earlier points, but one of the challenges that you have as an expat or in expat communities is people trying to show off. Unfortunately, this is something that is much more common in the United States, where I'm from. These guys or gals will brag about how wealthy they are, and they'll basically say, if you're not making 5, 6, 7K, 8, 9K a month in investment income or a pension, you might as well not even come over here. If you can't afford to eat in the nicest steakhouse in the city every night, live in the most upmarket district, drive a Porsche or a BMW, then you need to just stay in your home country. That attitude is just so out of place for me, and it's ridiculous because they're living in these countries where the average local person lives on much less than $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month and manages to survive. Now, am I saying you can live that cheap? No, I'm not saying that. They often have family support. That's a really big one. They also have the local language where they can access more affordable services, or they can negotiate discounts in some cases. They have this sort of cheat code, locals do, where they are able to moderate their cost of living. That being said, it's like anywhere else. Your lifestyle somewhat dictates your expenses. There are hidden expenses or unforeseen expenses that I think everybody needs to plan for. But saying that if you don't live in a gated community and have a personal driver every day to take you to the nicest restaurants in town every day, that you're not really living is ridiculous. I just compared how I live back home, and I live really well here on a modest amount of money. I don't have to be balling out every day to have a comfortable lifestyle. What's comfortable to one person may not be comfortable to somebody else, and vice versa. A lifestyle that one person may find unacceptable may be an awesome lifestyle to someone else. There's this sweet spot, in my opinion, of like 2 to 3K a month, where as a single person, you're not going to live that great in the West, in London or New York or San Francisco. In fact, in those cities, you might be hard-pressed to find just rent in that range, 2 to 3K a month. But in that range, a range in which you'd be really uncomfortable back home. You can live really comfortably in Latin America or in Southeast Asia. Are you going to live in the most upmarket district, drive a fancy car? No, but you can live in a reasonable sized apartment. You can eat local food, can purchase health insurance. You can have a more stable feeling lifestyle than you would back home trying to live on that amount. In part because unexpected expenses tend to not spiral out of control quite in the same way that they seem to in the West. A lot of expats move overseas to live a simpler life. They don't feel like, hey, I'm going to go overseas just to live exactly like I did back home, drinking the nicest bars in the city. No, they want a quiet, more chilled out lifestyle. It's not about necessarily for everyone living exactly like they did back home. And I think that if you want to live the way you did back home, you're probably better off back home. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that expat life is for everybody. I think that it takes certain characteristics or qualities to be successful overseas long term. Things like flexibility, adaptability, being able to live within your means, not getting carried away by scammers or people that are looking to rip you off. Big part of the status game thing too is pushing that you have to have a family. These oversized budgets don't make sense for everyone or shouldn't be a requirement for everyone. They're acting like, some of them, that if you don't give half of your money to charity, then you're not really living. If you're not spending half of your money going into the coffers of the local church, sponsoring private school educations for 10 people, that you're not really living overseas. Like, almost like they turn generosity into a status thing. Oh, I'm over here making things better. What are you doing? I'm not going to say that it's not good to do charity. I think charity can be a wonderful thing. But this idea that if you're not a saint, if you're not a savior, if you're not going around constantly doing good deeds, if you're not Batman, then you should stay in your home country, just goes back into that status thing. If you have a certain budget per month, you have investment income, free and clear, you calculate out roughly what it would cost you to live overseas, do a discovery trip, you figure out, do I even want to live here long term? Or is this place a better place to just visit? That's a better question than full black or white, either I live back home or I live overseas. The question, or the place that a lot of these people should start with, is not what's your budget. It should be, have you done a discovery trip? What was your discovery trip like? Because people will commit to living overseas. Before having done that, they'll go over there, for whatever reason it doesn't work out, and they go back home. They don't realize, hey, maybe I'm not a beach guy. Maybe I'm not a beach gal. I'd rather live in the mountains, or I'd rather live in tropical jungle, or whatever the situation may be. Well before you're talking about living overseas, you should be doing discovery trips. You should be planning this out, saving up, perhaps getting some online skills. These kinds of things are more important than, should I commit to the next 5 years or 10 years in some country I've never been to, or some country I've only vacationed to once and we spent the whole time at the beach. You really have to put the time in, and there's no shortcut to putting the time in. The fifth thing that I don't really care for when it comes to expat YouTubers is those that pick fights with other expat YouTubers. In this video, note that I didn't name any specific one. It does apply to some people that I like. I like to watch their videos. But it's still worth calling out. It should be a positive sum game. These expat communities should exist to uplift and to help each other out. If there's an expat that's really acting up, understand that the local officials will probably catch on. There'll probably be intervention, and you don't want to get involved in that kind of thing. The last thing that you want to do is try to move to another country and be a hero. Just as in your home country, you wouldn't go to some other city trying to be a vigilante or trying to save the day. And that's why I would say, pointing back to number 4 about not playing status games, don't get into arguments about status with other expats. Don't go on and on. Oh, which is better, Philippines or Thailand? Oh, I think Thailand's the best. Philippines stinks. Or, oh, you know, I mean, it's not really a purposeful conversation. It's like discussing whether hamburgers or hot dogs are the best. There's so many details that go into that, and so many nuances that they're not really realistic comparisons. Asking me to compare New York and LA, I can name a few things, but beyond those few things, it's going to be really really time consuming to get into those nuances. If you don't feel like it's relevant to you, I would say don't engage. If you see some expat YouTuber starting some drama, calling somebody out, go the other way. It's really just not a good idea to get wrapped up in that stuff. You don't want to get into legal issues. You don't want to make enemies. You want to, as an expat, go with the flow and get along with people, follow the rules, and live a life that's different and ideally better than the one you had back in your home country. I hope this video has been helpful. My name's Alex. Subscribe to the channel below if you haven't already, and I will talk to you soon.